what I'm insisting on. I'm insisting on the facts, and I now have three different versions of the facts,
that Travis Voyles
Department of Justice lawyers
are working on this every
who
single
admitted
day
in court that what you're saying now is not true.
We're not going to waste dollars just because you insist on EPA lighting taxpayer dollars on fire. The American taxpayers, they put President Trump in office because of people like you.
Now, you guys are going to have to start getting your stories straight, because there are three completely different statements, and they cannot all be true. Because if he put in a 10-hour day, that's 600 minutes of time for 781 grant applications, which means he would have had to conclude his review of each of them in 45 seconds without even a bathroom break.
Others did.
The second,
it's a crazy concept, Senator, but maybe more than one person was individually reviewing these grants. Maybe they were working on it for more than one day, Senator.
Will you show
three different versions of the same story, hundreds of EPA grants, and sworn testimony in federal court? Senator Sheldon Whitehouse confronted Lee Zeldin over what he called a glaring contradiction and demanded that the EPA explain itself under oath.
Administrator Zeldin, on April 23rd, Daniel Coogan, for the EPA, filed a sworn statement in court that said, and I quote here, EPA leadership conducted an individualized grant-by-grant review to determine which grants should continue. He made that statement under oath, and on the following page of his declaration, he said that there were approximately 377 grantees that had received cancellation notices and another 404 grantees who would receive notices within the next 2 weeks, for a total, by my math, of 781 total grantees. Do you dispute his testimony that there were 781 individual grants at issue?
The exact number I don't have offhand, but
you don't dispute it. So let's say that it's 781 or thereabouts.
I did those myself.
In April 2026, Senator Adam Schiff again pressed Zeldin over whether EPA actually conducted individualized reviews of hundreds of canceled grants. Zeldin agreed to provide the Senate with documentation showing the claimed individualized reviews. That means the exact question raised in this exchange, what evidence exists for those reviews, remained unresolved nearly a year later.
His testimony under oath was that that took place. Then, and I'd ask unanimous consent that that declaration of Daniel Coogan be made an exhibit. Then, on May 6th, Travis Voyles of EPA made the following statement, also under oath, also in a court filing. He said, on February 25th, 2025, I conducted an individualized review of EPA grant programs. That day, I decided that certain grant programs should be terminated for policy reasons. So there are three things about that Voyles statement that are noteworthy. First, the date. He said that he did this all on February 25th, which is interesting, because if he put in a 10-hour day, that's 600 minutes of time for 781 grant applications, which means he would have had to conclude his review of each of them in 45 seconds without even a bathroom break. The second thing about the statement is that he said, I conducted, not you conducted, Administrator Zeldin, not leadership conducted. He said he conducted, and he said that under oath. The third thing that was interesting is that he dropped in a weasel word, programs. He didn't say individualized review of grants. He said individualized review of grant programs. Mr. Zeldin, is there a difference between a grant and a grant program?
Well, you have individual grants inside of a grant program.
And you could have dozens or even hundreds of individual grants inside of a grant program, correct?
I know for a fact that Travis Voyles individually reviewed every single grant individually, and I know that I've reviewed every single grant individually, and I also know that
is
Travis
not what the
Voyles
sworn testimony indicates. Let me reclaim my time here.
But the fact
on
is,
May 16th,
we both individually reviewed all of the grants, and I know that he was working on it every single day, not just on one day.
Well, that's not what his sworn testimony was. And on May 16th, DOJ career lawyers who are under an obligation of candor to the tribunal upon which their right to practice law depends, filed a pleading in federal court that conceded that you had not done individualized grant-by-grant reviews. They were not contesting that APA failed to do an individualized review. In court, they admitted, in fact, their language is, defendants do not contest judgment on the merits of plaintiffs' APA claims.
And the legal fight over these grant cancellations continued into 2026. The D.C. Circuit case challenging EPA's cancellations remained active, with briefing continuing through August 2026. The latest court schedule shows EPA's response brief was due July 31st, and additional briefs were due August 14th. So the legality of the cancellation process was still being litigated more than a year after this confrontation.
I'd ask that the reply be put into the record, that the Voyles declaration be put into the record, and that an inside EPA news report that discusses that court proceeding be put into the record.
Without objection.
And then yesterday, you stated during your House E&C hearing that you personally reviewed all these grants. Here's what you said. I was the one who made the decision. And I made the decision after doing individual review. I personally reviewed every single grant that I canceled. Now, you guys are going to have to start getting your stories straight, because there are three completely different statements, and they cannot all be true. It cannot be that Voyles personally, himself, conducted the review of 781.
He did.
And that Coogan saw to it that it was individually done.
Others did. It's a crazy concept, Senator, but maybe more than one person was individually reviewing these grants. Maybe they were working on it for more than one day, Senator. Have you thought about that concept? What about the fact
when
that
their testimony is that they did it all on one day? No, I do not.
Every single time.
I do not agree with that, Administrator.
Senator.
He swore in court that he did it on one day. So you can't now come in and say that that's false.
You make a decision on a day after you work on it, busting your ass for a while to get all of your ducks lined up.
That's
not what he said. To do all the research, to ask questions, to make sure you're making responsible decisions.
None of that is what he said.
Because you're not worried that there's going to be some ranking member at the
None of that is what he said.
Who doesn't care about the facts.
None of that is what he said. I'm using the facts as your employees
I
stated them.
I conducted an individual review of everything, and that concept doesn't work for you.
When?
Lawmakers were still demanding the underlying documentation for his claim that he personally reviewed the canceled grants. And the dispute has remained active in federal court, where challengers continue to contest EPA's grant cancellation decisions. The key question raised here, whether the promised individualized review actually happened the way Zeldin described, has therefore remained a live issue.
When did you conduct that individualized review
of
781 grants?
We have a zero-tolerance policy.
Will you show me your schedule?
We inherit something. You don't care about wasting money.
Will you show me your schedule?
You don't care about wasting money, but the Trump administration does, Senator.
Will you show me your schedule?
Our schedule's publicly released. We don't put on the schedule every single moment of the day.
Will you show me your schedule to prove your assertion that you did individualized review of 781?
Under oath telling you that I was reviewing this stuff and working on it almost every single day.
And the problem with that...
Because when I was before this committee, I was asked by Senator Ricketts, if confirmed, would I immediately make this a top priority to go through all the grant funding going through EPA to make sure that we were cracking down on every waste, every aspect of abuse, because I have to come back here in front of Senator Ricketts today. And even though you don't care about wasting tax dollars, Senator Ricketts does.
And the
problem, I'm going to do my job because the American public cares about us not wasting tax dollars.
And the problem with your assertion here today is that it is belied by your own employees' sworn statements in court and by the decision of the Department of Justice to admit that what you say isn't true.
You're not grasping the fact that we would have multiple employees looking at these grants. That concept just escapes you like that's even a possibility.
The only thing about that is that that's not true.
You don't care about 99% of this story.
That's not true according to your own employees'
You're not grasping
testimony.
I don't know what to say to you. You're insisting on the fact.
I'm insisting on the facts. That's exactly what I'm insisting on. I'm insisting on the facts, and I now have three different versions of the facts,
that Travis Voyles
Department of Justice lawyers
are working on this every single day
admitted in court that what you're saying now is not true.
We're not going to waste dollars just because you insist on EPA lighting taxpayer dollars on fire. The American taxpayers, they put President Trump in office because of people like you. They have Republicans in charge of the House and Senate because of people like you, because you don't care about 99% of this story. You don't want me to go through the list of all the evidence of waste and abuse.
No, what I want you to do,
and conflicts of interest.
What I want you to do,
unqualified recipients. You don't care about
what I want you to do
oversight.
is explain why the Department of Justice lawyers representing EPA in court under a duty of candor have said that everything you've just said isn't true. That's what I want. Get me that answer.
I'm here before this committee.
I've exceeded my time. I'll let the chairman take back the gavel.
Thank you.
The dispute did not end with this May 2025 hearing. The latest major development came on August 4, 2026, when a federal appeals court ruled that the EPA acted unlawfully in trying to revoke roughly $20 billion in greenhouse gas reduction fund grants. The court reinstated an injunction blocking the EPA's attempt to claw back the grants, finding that the agency lacked a legal basis for the cancellations. The decision is now potentially headed toward Supreme Court review, and the individualized review issue specifically remained alive in 2026. On April 29, 2026, Senator Adam Schiff again pressed Zeldin about the canceled grants and the EPA's evidence that it had conducted individualized reviews. Zeldin agreed to provide the Senate with documentation supporting his claim that every canceled grant had been individually reviewed. Meanwhile, the D.C. Circuit litigation continued, with briefing extending into August 2026. That makes Sheldon Whitehouse's confrontation much more significant in hindsight. Whitehouse's central accusation was not simply that Zeldin canceled grants. His argument was that EPA's explanation for how those cancellations were made was inconsistent with sworn statements and court filings. The senator focused on approximately 781 grants and compared several different descriptions of a review process. One EPA declaration said leadership conducted an individualized grant-by-grant review. Another declaration from Travis Voyles referred to an individualized review of grant programs. Zeldin, meanwhile, testified that he personally reviewed every canceled grant. That distinction, grant versus grant program, was the heart of the confrontation. A grant program can contain dozens or hundreds of individual grants. So reviewing a program is not necessarily the same thing as examining every individual award. Whitehouse therefore challenged Zeldin's claim that every grant had actually received an individualized review. The senator's arithmetic was designed to make that argument memorable. If roughly 781 grants were reviewed by one person on February 25th, as Voyles' declaration appeared to indicate, Whitehouse argued that the amount of time available would have made a genuine grant-by-grant review extremely difficult. Zeldin rejected that interpretation. His explanation was that multiple people could have been reviewing the grants, and that the work had been taking place over more than one day. He insisted that he personally worked on the grants repeatedly, and that the administration was attempting to identify waste, abuse, and conflicts of interest. That disagreement is crucial because the later court proceedings gave the controversy a much larger legal dimension. In March 2026, Whitehouse publicly argued that thousands of pages of EPA documents produced in litigation failed to demonstrate the individualized review he believed the courts required. He specifically highlighted the distinction between reviewing individual grants and reviewing entire programs. But there is an important current development that complicates the story. The EPA ultimately received a major appellate victory in September 2025 in a separate stage of the GGRF litigation. The D.C. Circuit ruled 2-1 in favor of the agency and vacated district court order that had prevented EPA from terminating certain grants. EPA continues to argue that the grants were improperly awarded and that the agency has a responsibility to prevent taxpayer money from being wasted. Then came the August 4, 2026 appellate ruling, which moved the legal situation in the opposite direction on the broader cancellation effort. That court found that EPA's attempt to revoke approximately $20 billion in climate grants was unlawful and reinstated an injunction against the agency's actions. So the current picture is not simply Zeldin was proven right or Whitehouse was proven right. Different courts and different stages of litigation have produced different outcomes concerning different grants and legal questions. That distinction is important for your video because the hearing itself centered on the individualized review question, while the later litigation has involved the broader authority of EPA to terminate or freeze congressionally authorized grants. Whitehouse's broader concern, however, remains easy to understand. Congress appropriated the money. EPA awarded the grants. The Trump administration then attempted to cancel them based on concerns including waste, fraud, conflicts of interest, and policy priorities. Whitehouse argued that the executive branch could not simply substitute its policy preferences for Congress's spending decisions. Zeldin's position was essentially the opposite. The EPA has a responsibility to ensure that taxpayer money is being spent properly and that recipients actually satisfy the requirements for receiving federal funds. That creates the fundamental constitutional question underneath the political confrontation. How much authority does an administration have to reverse spending decisions made by a previous administration after Congress has already appropriated and obligated the money? The August 2026 appeals court ruling makes that question even more consequential. If the ruling survives further review, it could significantly restrict an administration's ability to cancel previously awarded climate grants simply because the new administration disagrees with the previous administration's policy choices. At the same time, the administration's supporters will argue that Congress did not authorize federal agencies to hand billions of dollars to organizations that allegedly had conflicts of interest or inadequate oversight. And that brings us back to the most explosive part of Whitehouse's questioning. He was not satisfied with Zeldin simply saying, "We reviewed the grants." He wanted documentation showing how the review was conducted, who performed it, when it happened, and what individual facts justified each cancellation. Zeldin, meanwhile, insisted that the administration had done the work and that multiple people were involved. The latest court developments mean that this was not merely a heated Senate exchange that disappeared after the hearing. The underlying fight over EPA's grant cancellations has continued into August 2026, with billions of dollars still caught up in litigation. So the biggest question left by this hearing is, was the Trump EPA genuinely conducting the individualized grant-by-grant review required to justify these cancellations, or was it using broad policy judgments about climate programs to reverse spending decisions that Congress had already authorized? And with the courts still fighting over the legality of those cancellations in 2026, that question is far from settled.